As I explained at the start, the evidence shows that events were planned in advance and involved a team who were managing two actors. The first was the unwitting Tommy Mair, who had been duped into being at a specific place just before the apparent murder. The second, a calm hitman impersonating Mair beforehand, then being seen to dispense of the target on Market Street before heading towards where they thought the patsy was. Many of you will be asking, and I have received many emails about this, whether anyone has made contact with Tommy Mair in prison. The answer is yes, I have, and I will come on to that contact shortly. If my theory is correct, it means Tommy Mair must be protesting his innocence from his prison cell. He must be telling people he did not murder anyone, and he has not even had a trial.
I went to see Tommy Mair's half-brother, Dwayne. He wasn't in. But there was a couple of lads outside his house, and when I left the house, one of them took a photograph of me in my van. So I thought, okay. I turned around and I went back to speak to them. Two Asian lads sitting in a little sports car. I says, yeah, well, I'll tell you why I'm here. I said, I'm investigating the Joe Cox thing because the chap there who lives there is a half-brother. He says, oh, yeah, okay. So anyway, I got talking to them and they invited me in their car. And I spoke to them. And obviously I told them that I was... there's another police van. I told them that I was investigating the case and that I had serious doubts about the police story. And they agreed. They agreed that they didn't believe the official story. And they even said that Dwayne, Tommy's half-brother, had expressed his doubts about whether he was capable of it or whether he would do it. They also said that Dwayne's house was searched by the police, and they remember the police calling there.
To my knowledge, the only person not involved in the police operation who has spoken to Tommy Mair since he was arrested is his mother. Attempts by me to speak to Tommy's mother have so far been fruitless.
I've come back now. I'm in my low-budget hotel room and I'm going to try and speak to Tommy Mair's mother today because there's a few things that she may be able to help with. Firstly, did Tommy Mair have a plan for that day, that Thursday? What was his routine going to be that day? So that'll give us a clue as to what his whereabouts may have been that day before he was arrested. Also would like to show her the photographs of the alleged Tommy Mair being interviewed by the police and photographs put out by the media because Tommy Mair's friends say that they are not the same person.
I've just knocked on the door of Mary Goodall, who is Thomas Mair's mother. She took a while to answer the door. Elderly-ish lady in her 70s, quite small woman. I said to her, Mary, and she acknowledged that. I said, my name's Richard Hall, I'm a researcher, I'm trying to help Tommy. As soon as I said that, she put her hand up and shook her head, as if to say, don't want to speak to you. I said, would you take this, which is a letter with everything explained in there. I said, look, I'll give you that because I believe he's totally innocent and I'm just trying to help him. Ring me if you want to. I just give her that and that was it. Now, she has got a neighbour a few doors away who was quoted in mainstream media as being with Mary on the day that it happened. So I thought, well, I'll not go there just now. I'll maybe go there tomorrow, give them a chance to speak to each other, and then if I go back to the friend, maybe the friend can relay her feelings about it, perhaps. Even the next of kin of people who've been used in these false flag operations will believe it. They will believe it because the police are telling them and everyone else is telling them, the media is telling them. But I suspect inside her is knowledge or a nagging doubt that he's innocent because she knew him. She knew he was a gentleman. She knew he took care of other people's cats, that he was a kind soul. He was not a far-right extremist, and she would know that. But it's understandable that people don't want to talk to you, because she will have had mainstream media at her door shoving down her throat the official story. Whether they know it's not true or not, that's what will have happened. So when the likes of me turns up a couple of years later, she just believes I'm one of them. She just thinks I'm trying to wallow in the misery or whatever, but I'm not. I'm trying to uncover an injustice. Right, I've just knocked on the door of Rosemary. That's Tommy Mare's mother's friend who lives 2 doors down from her. So I dropped the letter off with Tommy Mare's mother this morning, so I've come back later on this afternoon, knocked on the neighbour's door. She answered the door. I said, Rosemary, and she wouldn't even acknowledge her own name. And she said, I don't know you. I said, yeah, I know that. I'll tell you why I've come here. I said, I'm looking into the Joe Cox thing. Would you speak to me? And she said, no, I don't know you. And that was it. I wrote to Tommy Mare at Franklin Prison, and I deliberately made my first letter innocuous just to see if I could establish contact. This is what I wrote on the 13th of February 2018. Dear Thomas, I have some personal messages from a few of your friends in Birstall, which I would like to pass on to you. I met your cat Felix, who is doing well. Redacted, who lived on Redacted when she got the cat from you, is taking good care of him. If you send me your prisoner number, then I can request a visit and come and see you and tell you more. In order for me to visit you, you need to reply to me in writing at the above address with your prisoner number. I received a handwritten reply dated the 5th of March 2018. I have checked the handwriting and it is that of Tommy Mare. It states, Dear Richard, thank you for your letter dated the 13th of February. I was pleased to hear that Felix was still alive and doing well. Redacted is a great animal lover. Say hello and thank you for me. Also say hello if you can to Redacted and Redacted, Tommy's friends. As for you visiting me, I am not sure about that. I am a Category A prisoner convicted of a terrorism-related offence. This means all my visitors have to be vetted. I would need to fill in a form with your personal information, i.e. date of birth and phone number. Then the Prison Security Office would contact your local police force, South Wales. They would visit you at your home and take your photograph and send it to Franklin. The whole process took 6 weeks for my mother to be security cleared. I am sure you do not want to be put through all that security, just to visit me in faraway County Durham. Once again, thanks for your interest, and tell Redacted, thanks for looking after Felix. Best wishes, Tommy Mare. After receiving this, I immediately wrote back with my details and asked Tommy to put me on his visitor list. I did not discuss the case. As you can see from this letter, he seems happy for me to visit, advising me on how to go about it. Since this letter, I have written to him 3 further times and not had any response. I have requested prison visits several times and they have all been rejected. It seems that after this first letter got through, authorities have blocked all further communication and ensured I would not be approved to visit him in prison. All his letters, both in and out, are probably checked by the prison. In his letter to me, he is not admitting guilt. What he states in relation to his conviction sounds very official, like it's a legal statement. Was he told he had to put that in his reply? I am a Category A prisoner convicted of a terrorism-related offence. One of Tommy's close friends wrote to him in June 2018 and to date has had no reply. So it's not just me they are blocking correspondence from. It is also his friends. These attempts to contact Tommy without getting any information from him on what happened to him that day or any statement from him as to whether he is guilty or innocent reinforce my contention that he was a patsy. If he was guilty, then what would be the problem with allowing people to communicate with him? I have mentioned several pieces of evidence which seem to suggest that Joe Cox might not have died. This includes the actions of Fazila Aswat, who was unbelievably calm and collected and seemed to be controlling the area near the body. She was separated from the other witnesses and, according to some attending the trial, was an unconvincing witness when she took the stand. The body was not rushed to hospital but remained at the scene for at least 56 minutes. The body, according to one source, was taken straight to London without proper procedure. The jury were not allowed to see the body or even photographs of the body. I asked my first-hand witness who saw the body close up whether she saw any stab wounds or head injuries. No, she only saw blood. I've only been able to find witness statements describing blood and not actual injuries. 15 minutes after the murder, Brendan Cox sends a tweet. Today is the beginning of a new chapter in our lives. The pathologist was the dodgy Richard Shepherd, who also dealt with Princess Diana and Dodi's deaths, and you may recall he dealt with Dr. David Kelly's strange death. Then there is the lack of grief of Joe Cox's family. This YouTube video concludes that the family of Joe Cox were not grieving. It would be very interesting to have the words of Joe Cox's sister analysed by Peter Hyatt. But also in this film, I have presented compelling evidence that Tommy Mair was framed for the alleged murder and is currently in prison. Is it possible that both of these scenarios could be true? If the death was a hoax, I don't think DS Cass knows this. And as I said earlier, I think D.I. Wallen knows the full extent of the operation, which, if hoaxed, the agency orchestrating it would have fitted Cox with a blood pump under her clothing, moulage, etc., as seen in the Boston unbombing video. I can hear some people saying there is no reason why she would go along with something like this. I suggest you keep watching this film to the end. So, is there any evidence to suggest who the real hitman might be? The man seen fleeing the murder scene on Market Street, I suspect, is the same man getting out of the unmarked police car on Rysdale Avenue. I have discovered some very interesting information which might help identify him. Not many people know this, because it was kept out of mainstream media when it happened, but 11 days after Joe Cox's murder, another MP was given a death threat which stated, "Time for a stabbing and a shooting." The MP was Labour's Stephen Kinnock. This is interesting because Stephen Kinnock and Joe Cox were very close friends and both very pro-EU MPs. Their families holidayed together and they even shared the same office at Westminster. You could say that Cox and Kinnock were joined at the hip. So when Stephen Kinnock was threatened with a shooting and a stabbing just 11 days after Joe Cox was shot and stabbed, are we to believe that the man who threatened him just so happened to target the other half of this duo by chance? Or is it possible that the death threat made against Stephen Kinnock was in some way linked to the apparent murder of Joe Cox? The information about Stephen Kinnock receiving a death threat did not surface until the 13th of March 2017. That's 9 months after Cox was attacked. It appeared in the Evening Standard, but not in other mainstream publications. The article was very supportive of Kinnock, almost like a PR piece rather than a news report. Stephen Kinnock, "I've had smears against me, it was deeply unpleasant." After the murder of his friend Joe Cox, MP Stephen Kinnock received death threats from a man who has now been jailed. He tells Stephanie March about fighting hate and life as part of a power couple. 11 days after his colleague and close friend, the MP Joe Cox, was murdered in broad daylight by a man in her own constituency last year, another man, this time in Wales, was threatening to gun down Stephen Kinnock in a copycat killing. "Time for a shooting and a stabbing in Port Talbot before a good night out and a kebab," said the message. Kinnock remembers the death threat verbatim, written by Gareth Bamsey, a 53-year-old with a background in the armed forces. Bamsey's Facebook profile, since shut down by police, contained multiple images of him handling an assault rifle, cause enough for his house then to be raided in a joint operation between the Met and South Wales Police. Last month, Bamsey was tried and sent to prison, where he is now serving an 8-week sentence, as long as that. He was also fined £600 and banned from using the computer on which he committed the offence. This is the first time Bamsey's threats or conviction have been made public. Kinnock says he wants the incident known about. Is that to protect himself? People need to understand that you can't do this kind of thing. The police will take action. Gareth Bamsey on his Facebook page has claimed to have worked in 4 different military regiments and claims he works for the British government part-time. He has a receding hairline. He is exactly the same age as Tommy Mair. He has a similar stature to Tommy Mair. He walks with a limp and it appears is pigeon-toed and has inverted feet. I have seen photographs of Gareth Bamsey from his Facebook page. He has a very similar hairline and head shape to the man getting out of the car in the arrest video. He has played rugby for Magor Rugby Club. Here is his player profile. His nickname, Gareth Killer Bamsey. Is it possible that Gareth Bamsey is the man I have been referring to as the hitman in the Joe Cox operation? Finally, we come to the motive. This is tricky because I think the motive depends on whether Cox was killed or whether she is still alive. If you think government agencies cannot and do not change the identities of people for a range of reasons, please do some research. The nagging question which everyone turns to when they hear this theory is how could she leave her children to start a new life? This opens up another can of worms. I have been told there are no publicly available images of Jo Cox while pregnant. If she was recruited by intelligence services when at Cambridge University, it means her political career might have been serving some ulterior motive, and certain details about her life may not be 100% accurate. Did anyone visit the Coxes when they lived on their riverboat? There's enough for another film exploring the lives of Jo and Brendan Cox. Did somebody discover her real agenda, blow her cover, and so they decided to change her identity and reassign her? Or did they murder her because of something she was doing or something she knew? Many theories have been suggested, including that Jo Cox might have learned something about Gordon Brown, she may have learned something about an establishment paedophile ring. It might be linked to her stance on the Palestinian-Israeli or Syrian conflicts. It might be to do with the white helmets, or it could be to do with Brexit. When the murder occurred, at that time, many people were excited about the upcoming referendum, and some of those who were supporting Leave felt almost cheated when Jo Cox's murder happened. The Leave camp had a significant lead in opinion polls, and this event actually caused campaigning to be stopped. It seemed to knock the wind out of the Leave camp's sails. This led to, in some quarters, a theory being born, which was that pro-EU powers had killed or pretended to kill one of their most loyal supporters in order to reap sympathy and swing the vote towards them. I am going to explore something that Jo Cox may have been involved with shortly before she disappeared, because it has not been exposed anywhere as far as I know. It's going to take some explaining, so here goes. I need to explain some background about Britain's financial affairs and the EU's wish to control Britain's finances. This, of course, is what Brexit is really all about. This film gives a good explanation of how British offshore tax havens evolved and operate. Here are a few short clips.
Around the same time as American banks were moving their international operations to London, another new kind of financial space began to emerge, far away from London, in Britain's overseas jurisdictions, the last remnants of empire.
There are 14 of these overseas territories. 7 of them are bona fide tax havens, including the Cayman Islands, Bermuda, the British Virgin Islands. Some of the biggest tax havens in the world today are still British.
It's about providing a legal space in which you pretend activity is taking place. And the importance of that is that you pretend it's not taking place in the economy where it really is taking place. So you're taking activity from the place where it's regulated and taxed and pretending that it's happening elsewhere. Now, where doesn't really matter, it's just elsewhere.
In Britain, nobody goes to jail. No bankers go to jail. They generally don't. They are a protected species. And that is part of the offshore business model of the UK, is to say, we will protect you, we will bring your money here, we will look after you, we're not going to put you in prison, we'll let you do what you want. Swiss banking secrecy is the most famous, the most well-known. You put your money in a Swiss bank and they promise not to tell anybody, and that's one kind of secrecy. But another kind of secrecy, which is very British, is the trust. And the trust is a very slippery, complicated and devious mechanism.
So actually trusts are, to all intents and purposes, invisible arrangements. We're not talking about a few million. We're talking now about trillions. Trillions of dollars of capital, which apparently belong to nobody. For tax purposes and for other purposes, they belong to nobody. Now think that one through, because we are talking about maybe as much as $50 trillion of assets sitting offshore behind these instruments.
An offshore structure will often have a trust kind of sitting at the top of it. The trust will be here managing the assets, kind of controlling the assets. Underneath it, the trust will own some shell companies. Each one might be in a different jurisdiction. So you might have a trust in one jurisdiction whose trustees are somewhere else, whose beneficiaries are somewhere else, which owns offshore companies somewhere else. Each of these companies might then own assets, so that they might own, a bank account, a racehorse, a yacht, a painting, a portfolio of shares or whatever.
Now, this racket has gone on for decades, and regulators in the EU want to make it transparent, which is not popular with those who are evading tax or involved in other dodgy activities.
But the thing is, it's sticking their nose into various countries. Shouldn't those sovereign nations get their act together and deal with it internally, rather than just leave it to some sort of European body to start sort of more and more fingers and more pies?
Perhaps we'll have to put our finger in the former British colonial pie.
If we do not regulate the offshore industry, that's going to be the Wild West. And I just want to stress that we are not looking at taxes here only. We found child abuse, we found weapons deal, we found terrorists or everything. So we're not talking about some small crimes. We're talking about big crimes here. So I think there is the need for regulation.
From the EU's perspective, there are financial malpractices by British individuals and companies on a vast scale which need to be addressed. These malpractices may or may not be illegal, but from their standpoint, more transparency of where people are hiding money is required, stricter regulation is required, clearer rules on what can and cannot be allowed must be implemented, and the whole British offshore money racket must be investigated and sorted out. This is one of the main reasons pro-EU executives use for arguing that Britain should be in the EU, so that this issue can be sorted out. They claim it would benefit ordinary people financially because it would mean rich people would pay a lot more tax. I make no judgment here on whether this is correct. I am aware of claims that the EU was also corrupt and undemocratic. So if you are a pro-EU executive taking part in the battle to get Britain into the EU, something that would help your cause would be to expose Britain's offshore tax haven racket. If you could expose seedy, never-before-published, intimate details of thousands of names and thousands of companies involved in British-controlled offshore hiding places, you could undermine the reputation of Britain as a financial entity. You could turn the British public against the British establishment and get the public to vote to remain in the EU referendum. And this, I suspect, is exactly what happened when news about the so-called Panama Papers was published on the 3rd of April 2016, just 2.5 months before the UK referendum. The Panama Papers were a set of 11.5 million leaked documents, which threatened to expose predominantly the activities of British tax havens. I say threatened because I don't believe the content has ever been released for the public to download and scrutinise. As far as I am aware, German newspaper Süddeutsche Zeitung holds all the files and drip-fed sections of them to various media outlets around the world.
It's possibly the biggest data breach in history. The Panama Papers are a set of 11.5 million confidential documents that detail the banking activities of more than 214,000 offshore companies operating through the Panamanian law firm Mossack Fonseca. The papers, which date back to the 1970s, were anonymously leaked in early 2015, and the information they contain was first made public on April 3, 2016.
We are a firm of nearly 40 years' existence. We have formed more than 250,000 anonymous corporations through our history, and we take care only of the legal part.
As of mid-April, 15 current or former world leaders had been referenced in the documents, as well as hundreds of other politicians, public officials, sports people, and celebrities. Only a small percentage of the information had been published as of April 2016, and pressure was expected to mount on governments to reform tax systems to ensure that richer people are taxed correctly. The documents were given to the German newspaper Süddeutsche Zeitung by an anonymous source. The source reportedly claimed that his life would be in danger if his identity were revealed, due to the sensitive nature of the information held in the papers, and the powerful people to which it related.
It was over a year ago that this anonymous source contacted Süddeutsche Zeitung, saying, "Hello, my name is John Doe," and asked us if we are interested in data.
Süddeutsche Zeitung shared the documents with the International Consortium of Investigative Journalists, which then distributed them to around 400 journalists at 107 media organizations around the world. The data was held for more than a year before initial reports were published. The ICIJ promised to publish a full list of companies involved with Mossack Fonseca by May 2016. The publication of the Panama Papers exposed an ugly world truth and confirmed what many already suspected. While the majority of people pay their taxes fairly, some of the richest have set about dodging their share. Perhaps the most shocking aspect of the Mossack Fonseca leak is that it likely represents just the beginning, with more names expected from this breach, and thousands more supposedly partaking in similar practices but with different firms. The calls for global financial reform can scarcely have been louder, but change could be a long time coming, as the scale of the problem is only just becoming clear.
In my opinion, news of these papers probably not the right word, 2.6 terabytes of data, was announced strategically at this time by a pro-EU camp which probably had lots of money to pay for such a leak, and I think it was done in order to help sway the Brexit vote towards Remain. There would have been very rich people within the British establishment extremely annoyed and possibly very worried about this leak. The issue was considered so important that the Labour Party forced a parliamentary debate on the 11th and 13th of April 2016 to ask the government to carry out an investigation into the content of the Panama Papers. An investigation was knocked back.
And the House should note that this will place our overseas territories and crown dependencies well ahead of many other similar jurisdictions, but also, crucially, ahead of many of our major international partners, including some states in the United States of America. Next month, we will seek to go further still, using our anti-corruption summit to encourage consensus not just on exchanging information, but actually on publishing information, putting it into the public domain, as we're doing here in the UK. Because we want everyone with a stake in fighting corruption, from law enforcement, civil society to the media, to be able to use this data and help us to root out and deter wrongdoing.
Having spent 10 years as an aid worker, I'm acutely aware of the millions of pounds that are lost to development in poor countries as a result of these tax havens. And does my honourable friend agree that ahead of May's anti-corruption summit in London, the Prime Minister needs to do far more to reassure the House that he will accelerate his efforts to persuade British Overseas Territories to mirror the UK's welcome move and establish a transparent public register of beneficial ownership?
There's a lot of diversion going on here in what David Cameron is spinning. His anti-corruption summit was an attempt to turn attention away from Britain's financial practices and onto the practices of other nations. It was not an attempt to tackle offshore tax havens. It was a way of stifling the damage to British interests that might have been caused by the content of the Panama Papers. In this little exchange with the Queen and David Cameron, we are supposed to believe that the cameraman has caught David Cameron speaking to the Queen without Cameron's knowledge. Do they think we were born yesterday? This is a scripted exchange involving the Queen, done for the benefit of the camera, with state asset Speaker of the House standing by.
Britain's Prime Minister has been heard on camera calling Nigeria and Afghanistan, quote, fantastically corrupt countries. David Cameron was speaking to the Queen about an anti-corruption summit in London, which opens on Thursday. Take a listen.
We've had a very successful cabinet meeting this morning. We talk about our anti-corruption summit. We've got the Nigerians. We've got some leaders of some fantastically corrupt countries coming to Britain. Nigeria and Afghanistan, possibly the two most corrupt countries.
If they feel the need to involve the Queen in this mini psyop, someone must have been very nervous. Was the Crown itself worried about the content of the Panama Papers, I wonder? It seems that even though Parliament voted against an investigation into the content of the Panama Papers, Jo Cox continued to pursue this issue. This article in The Telegraph, dated the 11th of May 2016, 1 month before her apparent murder, is written, incredibly, by the most unlikely couple. A couple who, on the Brexit debate, were at opposite ends of the political spectrum. Jo Cox and David Davis. Can you believe this? Now, I suspect that Jo Cox has written most of this article I am about to read, and I don't believe for 1 second that David Davis was interested in tackling tax havens. If he was, he would have voted for an investigation into the Panama Papers, as Jo Cox and Stephen Kinnock did. I don't have time to go into it here, but I have suspected for many years that David Davis is an agent of some sort, either of the state or the City of London, and was sent by pro-British state players to get close to Jo Cox and find out what her involvement was with the Panama Papers leak. That is why I think he's writing an article with her here, in an attempt to get close to her to find out what she was doing. David Davis's website reads, I had the pleasure of working with her on a campaign to crack down on tax havens, and there is no doubt that everyone will greatly miss her campaigning zeal. What's happened to the tax haven campaign now, David? Too busy on other things. The article reads, forget Nigeria, David Cameron needs to tackle the tax havens in Britain's own backyard. David Cameron thinks that Nigeria is fantastically corrupt. Certainly it has a reputation, but the Panama Papers have shifted the focus of corruption far up the supply chain to the people who make corruption possible, and those people are often rather closer to home. The article goes on, but careful readers of the Panama Papers will notice an important fact that should have given Cameron pause for thought before he made his comments to the Queen. More than half of the companies named in law firm Mossack Fonseca's files are incorporated in Britain's own tax havens. In fact, a full 50% of the companies are from the British Virgin Islands. Now bear in mind that the content of the Panama Papers have not been published, only brief outlines of what they contain as far as I am aware. So Cox's statement, careful readers of the Panama Papers, suggests to me she may have had inside knowledge on the content. The article goes on. Moreover, there may never be a better opportunity than this. Politics is the art of the possible, and the revelations of the Panama Papers mean the landscape of what is and is not possible has recently undergone a seismic shift. The centrepiece of the Prime Minister's plan should therefore be to require the UK's tax havens to stop selling secrecy and set up fully public registries of the real owners of companies, just like we're doing in the UK. We know that Jo Cox was one of the most ardent supporters of the EU. Is it possible she was involved in some way with the Panama Papers release? Was Jo Cox an agent propped up by EU forces to help facilitate covert operations such as the leaking of the Panama Papers? After all, if it was done to undermine Britain's reputation, as I suspect, having politicians bleating about it on the benches of the UK Parliament would mean the release of this dirt would be all the more effective. But is there any evidence of Jo Cox's actual involvement in the release of the Panama Papers? Well, perhaps. Here goes. When the Panama Papers were released anonymously, an 1,800-word statement giving the reason why this sensitive information was being released was put out by the person or entity that leaked them. The entity called itself John Doe, which is an American term similar to Joe Blogs. You can find the 1,800-word statement online. In my opinion, there are American influences within the text, but there are also British influences. For example, the use of the word Tories to describe Conservatives. The word Tories is most often used by Labour supporters. I have looked at various articles written by Jo Cox, and one unusual habit she had when writing articles was to separate out phrases using 2 dashes, rather like brackets are used. Here are a few examples from an article she wrote about Brexit and immigration. We see it used here, here, and here. She also uses single dashes, here and here. The technique is used 3 times in the Telegraph article I read out earlier, here, here, and here. And interestingly, the technique appears twice in the John Doe statement, here and here, also with consistent use of dashes to separate words. Is this just a coincidence? Some of the phrases in the John Doe statement sound like the sort of language she would use. Massive, tantamount, legalese, defining issues of our time. Another observation about the John Doe statement is the reason the author gives for the release of the information is more or less what Jo Cox was campaigning for, to try and tackle inequality. Although I doubt that was the real reason these papers were released. If it was discovered by certain quarters that Jo Cox played a major role in leaking the Panama Papers, this would have put her in grave danger. Was she discovered poking a huge hornet's nest in order to help manufacture pro-EU news stories? Barack Obama made a speech at the White House on the 5th of April 2016 supporting the release of the Panama Papers, spelling out their importance.
In the news over the last couple of days, we've had another reminder in this big dump of data coming out of Panama that tax avoidance is a big global problem. It's not unique to other countries because, frankly, there are folks here in America who are taking advantage of the same stuff. A lot of it's legal, but that's exactly the problem. It's not that they're breaking the laws, it's that the laws are so poorly designed that they allow people, if they've got enough lawyers and enough accountants, to wiggle out of responsibilities that ordinary citizens are having to abide by. Here in the United States, there are loopholes that only wealthy individuals and powerful corporations have access to. They have access to offshore accounts, and they are gaming the system.
This post on the David Icke website states that Jo Cox's husband, Brendan, visited the White House on the 23rd of May, 27th of May, and on the 13th of June 2016, 3 days before his wife was allegedly killed. In Brendan Cox's book, he states that Barack Obama telephoned him on the 20th of June 2016, 4 days after she was allegedly killed, and invited him and the kids to visit the White House. I have not yet mentioned the name George Soros, whose Open Society Foundation funds the ICIJ. Remember, they handled the leaked data, and I suspect some viewers have been screaming out his name as the person who possibly financed everything I have been talking about. Soros is also a big funder of Obama's party, the Democrats, of course. So, sticking my neck out, I think the motive for the Jo Cox operation was that she was an agent working in the interests of EU powers and was involved in what might be considered dirty tricks against the British establishment, possibly backed by George Soros. David Davis was used by the agency he secretly is working for to try and find out what she was up to. Once they found out what she was up to, her cover was blown, she was then in danger and also no longer any use as a pro-EU agent. So they decided she needed to disappear, and in doing so, attempted to gain more votes to remain in the EU. So hoaxing her death might have been a way of protecting her. If she was killed, then perhaps the pro-British side killed her because of what she had been up to. Whatever the motive was for killing her, or pretending to kill her, she was not killed by Tommy Mair. Reams and reams of bullshit are written in mainstream media based on flawed assumptions about hate and extremism. Tommy did not hate anyone, and he was not an extremist. He cared more about cats than he cared about politics. My lasting impression of Birstall was seeing Felix sitting on top of a wheelie bin, staring at me with curious eyes, as if she knew I was there to help Tommy. Yes, Felix is a girl, and that, I think, says something about Tommy's sense of humour. I wonder if Jo Cox is now a boy. If only people were as honest as cats. If you're an MP watching this, what are you going to do? Are you going to help get an innocent man out of prison? Or are you going to sit on your green leather seat, clapping your hands like a demented seal? Got my own hotel in the back of my van, and this is what I use when I go on my investigation. So I'm currently in Leeds city centre. It's about 1 o'clock in the morning, and I'm here investigating the Jo Cox case. So this is a slip, just like a house light switch, off and on. There's a second battery, right, which there's an inverter behind there which converts it to 240. So I've got mains electricity if I want it. But everyone in the town believes the official story, so anyone who's going against it at this point in time is, you know, could get into trouble. What's the toilet? I haven't been yet.